We have made a big deal out of the fact that in macroeconomic equilibrium, savings equals investment. Remember these equations? Your income and its uses, spend, save, or pay taxes, and aggregate expenditure, which in equilibrium has to equal income. Set income equal to income, and with a little algebra, you derive this remarkable equation, which says that in equilibrium, savings equals investment. That is, all the money that businesses borrow to build new factories and buy new equipment has to come from people's savings, whether households, the government, or foreigners. But what makes this happen? Usually, this kind of equilibrium comes about because of the adjustment of prices in a market. And this case is no different. The money that businesses borrow and the money that people save is brought into equilibrium by adjustment in the interest rate. The interest rate changes so as to make the quantity of funds saved equal to the quantity of funds borrowed. Let's see how this works by looking at a supply and demand diagram. The supply and demand are going to be savings and investment. We'll start with the demand for loanable funds, which is the money that businesses want to borrow. Then we'll look at what people want to save, both of them influenced by the interest rate. Now, when you draw a supply and demand diagram, you've got to be very clear about what's on the axis. On the horizontal axis, we put quantity, and in this case, it's the quantity of loanable funds. Since we're going to talk about demand first, we're going to label this axis with capital I, investment spending, because this is businesses wanting to borrow money, the demand for loanable funds. On the vertical axis, we have the price of loanable funds, which is the interest rate, what you have to pay to borrow money. Now, this brings up a point that can cause some confusion, so stay with me for a minute, and that is the difference between the nominal interest rate and the real interest rate. The nominal interest rate is the interest rate that's written on the sign at the bank, what you get paid for your savings account. Say 10%. You leave $100 in the bank today, and next year you can take out $100 plus 10% interest for a total of $110. But that's not really what people care about. They don't really care about what's on the sign. They care about their purchasing power. I care about this. I'm going to put in $100 in the bank today. That means I'm giving up a pair of shoes. I want to know next year when I take out $110, what can I buy with it? A pair of shoes and a cool pair of socks? Or maybe prices have gone up by so much that I can't even afford the shoes anymore. Maybe now I have to settle for something less. So the question is, what happens to my purchasing power? Because what's going to happen to my purchasing power determines whether I want to save money or whether I want to spend it today. Let's look at Irving Fisher's equation. We've seen this before, that the nominal interest rate, that is what the bank pays you, is equal to the real interest rate plus the rate of change in prices, that is the rate of inflation. The real rate of interest plus the rate of inflation is equal to the nominal interest rate. Let me see if I can make this clear with an example. Suppose the bank agrees to pay you 10% interest. So you put $100 in today, at the end of a year you're going to get $110. Your question is, how much of that money just goes to keep my purchasing power constant? That is, suppose the rate of inflation is 6%. If the rate of inflation is 6%, then of this 10% that you're getting, it takes 6% just to keep your purchasing power constant, just to keep your purchasing power from shrinking. That means the remaining 4% is actually an increase in your purchasing power. That is, after prices have risen, your $110 that you get at the end of the year actually allows you to buy 4% more stuff than you could have bought last year. So, is 4% enough to get you to save? Maybe, maybe not. Let's see if we can make the deal any better. Suppose that 10% interest occurs in an environment that has only 2% inflation. That means the rate of change in the level of prices is now only 2%. Well, that means that of this 10%, it takes 2% to keep you even with inflation, which means that the real interest rate now is 8%. You got an 8% increase in your purchasing power. Now maybe you're more interested in putting money in the bank, if that's going to be the case, because you get more stuff. So what people care about when they decide whether to save money or not is the real interest rate. And the real interest rate is a comparison between what the bank says it's going to pay and what you think prices are going to do. Now, think about this from the point of view of a business. Suppose you're a farmer and you can plant 10 bushels of wheat today and wind up with 11 bushels of wheat a year from now. So the real rate of return, the rate at which your output is multiplying, is 10%. So you'd be willing to pay the bank up to 10% interest to borrow the money to buy the wheat. However, suppose wheat prices are rising. Maybe they're rising at 5% annual rate. So you know that the wheat you buy today is going to cost less than the wheat you sell a year from now. It's as if you're going to get extra money out of this deal just because of inflation. Well, the fact that you're going to get this extra money makes you willing to pay the bank an even higher rate of interest, because the money you get next year is going to be part of what you pay back the bank. So the 10% real rate of interest plus the inflation rate of 5% adds to a nominal interest rate of 15% that you could afford to pay the bank and still break even on this deal. So what you really care about is the real rate of interest. You want to know how much purchasing power is going to be left for me, the business owner, after I've paid off my loan. The nominal interest rate is equal to the sum of the real rate of return on the project plus the rate of inflation. Now, let's suppose, for the sake of the rest of our discussion here, that inflation is held constant. If that's true, then the real rate of interest, R, is going to move in exactly the same direction as the nominal rate of interest. The bank raises the nominal interest. If inflation doesn't change, the real rate of interest goes up. So for the rest of my discussion, even though businesses and savers and everybody's concerned about purchasing power and the real rate of interest, if we hold inflation constant, we can talk about the nominal rate of interest and be talking about the same thing. Now, let's think about the demand for loanable funds. What makes businesses willing to borrow money? The answer is making a profit, right? So suppose the rate of return on a project is 10%. If the rate of return on a project is 10%, then you're willing to pay up to 10% to borrow the money. Not 15, not 20, 10. However, if you can borrow the money for 5% interest, then you've got extra profit. And if you could borrow it for 2, you're ecstatic. So what happens is we get a downward sloping demand curve for loanable funds. And the downward sloping demand curve says this: as the rate of interest increases, as the nominal rate of interest increases, holding inflation constant, as the real rate of interest increases, businesses are less interested in borrowing money because there's less profit left for them after they've paid off the bank. At high interest rates, businesses will borrow small quantities of loanable funds because there aren't enough projects that earn a high enough rate of return to make it profitable. At a low rate of interest, however, businesses will do lots more projects because more projects are profitable. There's more left for the business after the bank is paid off. That's why the demand curve for loanable funds slopes downwards. Businesses find that more of their projects are profitable the lower the interest rate goes, because there's more profit left for them after the bank is paid. Now, the next question we want to ask as we develop this picture is, what causes the curve to shift? Say we've got a given interest rate here, maybe it's 10%. And at this given interest rate, businesses want to borrow a total amount of money, say it's equal to $100,000. What could happen that would lead businesses to want to borrow more money at the same interest rate? What would lead businesses to want to borrow, say, $200,000 at this interest rate of 10%? Well, let's think about the things that would increase business profits and make borrowing money more attractive. Number one, a change in technology. Suppose a new technology comes along that allows you to replace workers with less expensive machines in your business. Or maybe there's a productivity change that makes your existing workers more productive when they use computers or some new technique. You get more output from a given amount of input, and that makes your project more profitable. And since it's more profitable, you need to borrow more money so you can build more factories and take advantage of this profit opportunity. A second thing that shifts out the demand curve is tax policy. Suppose the government cuts corporate profit taxes. That means you get to keep more of every dollar that comes into your business. Since business is more profitable, you're inclined to expand your business, and that means borrowing more money at any given interest rate. A third thing that influences this demand is increases in real gross domestic product. We've talked before about the multiplier, that is, an increase in investment spending increases GDP by a multiple. Well, there's also a relationship that works in the other direction. It's called the accelerator. When real gross domestic product increases, that is, when the economy grows, Businesses decide that they want to invest more. That is, since business opportunities are obviously better, the economy is growing, investment spending increases. This is called the accelerator because the expansion in GDP feeds back into businesses' decision, leading them to spend more on plant and equipment. A fourth factor is expectations about the future. When you become more optimistic, expecting that your business profit opportunities are going to be brighter, then you want to take advantage by building a factory today, acquiring new equipment, borrowing more money at any given interest rate. And finally, what we call animal spirits. Animal spirits is kind of the herd instinct. Everybody senses that the economy is going well. Everybody else around you is investing, things are booming, so you just jump in and go with it. Or maybe your gut just tells you, now's a good time to build a factory. Who can account for animal spirits, people's instincts, and how they work themselves out in the economy? Any of these changes can lead to an increase in the demand for loanable funds, an increase in investment spending at any given interest rate. So we show that by a shift in the demand curve. On the other hand, if things change in a way that's adverse for business, then the demand for loanable funds shifts inwards. Businesses want to borrow less money at any given interest rate. So, for a quick recap, if you look at the relationship between business investment spending and the real interest rate, you'll find that it's inverse. Higher real interest rates deter investment spending. Lower real interest rates encourage investment spending. And a little catalog of factors, including taxes, technology, and animal spirits, can lead to an increase in investment spending at any given interest rate, which we show by a shift in the demand curve. So, now we've talked about the demand for loanable funds. Next, we'll consider the supply and the behavior of savers.